Hello and welcome back to the High Man podcast. Thank you for joining us again. It is Friday, the 24th of March, currently 3:49 p.m. It's episode 30, a bit of a milestone, shall we say? I don't know how many months we've been doing it now. Maybe like 6 to 7 months, maybe. Would you say, Pete?
Yeah, something like that. When did we do the first one? July. So
Oh shit, a lot longer than actually.
like 8 months, probably.
Yeah, bloody hell.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us again. Today is just going to be another general discussion. No kind of pre-thought out topics in depth, really. Just going to bounce some ideas off about what we've been thinking about recently and stuff. I hope you guys enjoy. I guess we'll get stuck straight in, shall we?
Let's do it.
Yeah, so following on from last week, we were talking about like anger and these other sort of emotions, and we discussed what kind of can cause them, what they are a little bit, and some remedies to kind of process them and help move on from them. One thing that we didn't necessarily discuss, but I kind of realised in myself, is that when I'm like the last week or two, I've been like a little bit more frustrated and like a bit more neurotic, shall we say? And I've realised that one of the ways that has helped me to be a bit more, I don't know what the word is, but to be a bit more happy, I guess you could say, it's just finding the good in people and things that I do. I can't remember exactly what happened or something, but I'd realised that I've forgot to look for the positive things in I forgot to look for the good in things and people. When I realised that, it made me happier, really. Simply. What are your ideas on that, Pete? I feel like sometimes we can focus too much on the negative of a situation or a person or anything like that, and forget about the positive that situation or person can bring to one's life.
Yeah, I think as humans, we definitely have a tendency to do that, and that perhaps that comes from our negativity bias, where we've evolved to be more sensitive to negative things. So if you take person A and person B, back when we were evolving, the person who was more likely to spot out a threat, as opposed to a positive thing, was more likely to survive. So that's the reason why we might be biased towards seeking out the negative in things. And it's in a way, we're always kind of searching for more and searching for better, because that's how we're programmed for survival. But that it can definitely have a negative impact on our well-being. And a way we can start to take that back is by making a conscious effort to, in this example, like you said, to try and see the good in people. And I think it comes down to gratitude, really, being grateful for the good that there is, and for the good in people, and acknowledging that, and trying to push back on our tendency to focus on the negative.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, I think I realise like it's getting a bit more sunny recently, and like the weather's kind of picking up slowly. Although it's been quite bipolar on certain days, but just walking out and about, or like doing even small like tasks, remembering that, like, as like kind of wishy-washy as it kind of sounds, like remembering that you should just be thankful for what you're doing in the present moment. It's something that I forgot. Like walking down the street and seeing some cherry blossom trees, like those cherry blossoms, I can't wait to get my own house and have one in my garden, because I just fucking love them. And like I walked past them once and I was just like wasn't enjoying them, and I realised that like you said, I've just forgot to have that gratitude and like be grateful for the small things in life.
Yeah. I feel like probably so much of human suffering happens in situations where there are things to be grateful for, particularly in the modern world, where we're not, the vast majority of the time, we're not in life-threatening situations. It's easy to become caught up in the day-to-day struggles, and that can kind of lead to seeking escapism, whether that be through just any kind of consuming of pleasure, or by whatever other means. But I think it's good. It takes us back into the present moment to be more grateful about things, and allows us to probably act more properly as well.
I think one thing that I would like sometimes think to myself is how can like you kind of be grateful for what you have right now if you're like if almost if like you're just not in the mood for it and you haven't really got like any time of day to process like the good things in your life, if that makes sense. And then
Yeah.
one thing that kind of sticks out to me is how, I mean, obviously I've never experienced anything like it, but like how people who go through like really tough times like war times or people that survived like the gulag and like all these terrible atrocities in the 20th century and before and to this day actually, loads of them still come out really happy. Not happy like shall I say, but like they'll come out still with that ability to appreciate what they have even though they have literally nothing and it was just suffering. It kind of puts into perspective like your own situation a bit, I think.
Yeah. Some you hear stories about people who go through such hardship, they're still able to maintain a positive outlook on the world and on life, which is quite an incredible thing. But yeah, I've heard certain people saying like gratitude journaling, so taking some time every day to write down things you're grateful for can switch your mindset. It's not something I've really done myself, but perhaps a tool to experiment with.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Writing every day seems to be a habit that just only brings about successful outcomes for every single person that does it. Um, and that's something I've like neglected definitely most of my life and recently as well. Um, the gratitude one always kind of gets me though. Like I know it does work, and but I've never tried it. I always do think like it's a little bit like I can just say in my own head, "Oh, I'm grateful for this. I'm grateful for that." Why do you think writing it down makes such a difference?
I think it probably just makes it more of a solid habit, and I think there is something to be said that writing something down kind of consolidates your thoughts. Whereas sometimes if the thoughts are just floating around in your minds, they're not really well defined.
Mm.
So I think that could be the benefit of writing, but also in this case, in terms of gratitudes, it probably would be fine if you every day just remember to spend some time thinking about it. But I guess writing is just another means to that, and maybe a way of making it more of a habit.
Right. Okay. But like making sure there's a conscious effort to process those thoughts rather than just like letting them come and go. So, like you said, even
Yeah,
if it is just sitting there for a minute or 2 minutes and just thinking through what you actually are grateful for, there's a conscious like consciousness to it. Is that a word? Maybe it's not a word.
um, yeah, nah. Well, yeah, what you said there, yeah, that's I agree with that. Like, I don't think it necessarily matters if you write things down, but even spending some time to actively think about that.
Mm. Yeah, I hear that. Although I think
Yeah,
writing it
another
down.
thing.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, sorry. Another thing that I've heard is kind of I heard it in relationship to stoicism, that a practice some people do to make themselves more grateful, which seems counterintuitive, is to actually do like negative visualizations. So think about the terrible things that could happen, or the terrible things that other people could do to you, and in that is kind of contemplating death, your own death, and the death of people close to you. And on the surface, you might think, why would I want to think about that? That would make me feel more negative.
Mm.
But I think what a lot of people find is doing that practice actually makes you more grateful for the things you've had now, because you've deeply considered what the negative alternatives are, which on a daily basis you know you don't think to yourself, oh, I'm grateful that I don't have cancer, even though like if you did have cancer, that you'd do anything to go back to when you didn't.
Yeah.
That's just an example, um, but yeah, do you think negative folk, imagining the negative can actually make you more grateful as well?
Yeah, I think the reason I agree with it, it kind of links back to the idea that Jordan Peterson talks about, how like the staring into the abyss seems like a daunting task, but like if you stare into it long enough, it will stare back at you. And then I don't know if it was Nietzsche or Peterson that extended it, saying if you stare into it even further than that, eventually you'll see the light. I don't know if those two kind of things link, or if that's a bit of an abstract pattern I'm seeing, or what. But it makes sense, to be fair.
Yeah,
I guess there's a
yeah, no,
challenge of like just not focusing on that negative, because people can kind of, I think people can kind of become a bit overwhelmed by the fear, like, oh, if I imagined that I could have cancer or I could die tomorrow, I might get fixated on that and try and focus all my efforts to avoid that, and it might become a bit counterintuitive.
yeah, yeah, I can see that. But yeah, I do. I definitely agree with that in terms of looking into the abyss, because that kind of links to what you said about certain people who've gone through really terrible things in their life coming out with positive outlooks. And a couple of examples of them are Viktor E. Frankl. I'm about to start reading his book, Man's Search for Meaning, but basically he was in the Holocaust. He was in the concentration camps, and a lot of people close to him died, and obviously he was living this life of great suffering. And I'm about to start reading the book, but I think it's about how he found purpose in that, and you know, obviously probably emerged as someone with a positive outlook. And I think another example of that is Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote the Gulag Archipelago. That he also, despite the terrible things he'd witnessed in the Soviet Union, he still emerged with his view on life was that that the good outweighs the bad, and the good is
Mm.
powerful enough to overcome the evil. And so both of those people are people who have gone to the depths of suffering, that is possible, but they've still emerged with um, a positive outlook on things. And I suppose that kind of links into one of the next points about hardship, about how, perhaps another way to become more grateful is to put yourself through extreme difficult situations. So do you want to pick up on that, because you had a talking point?
Yeah, so um, I want to discuss the benefit of doing hard things. Like, obviously, a theme in most of the episodes that we discuss is kind of the idea of trying to become a higher man and challenge yourself so you can grow and become the person that you actually want and self-actualize. And I know for myself and as most people, it's difficult to build habits that challenge yourself, like going to the gym every day, or like sticking to a strict diet, or doing like uni work or your like job work or whatever. Maintaining those habits are difficult, but I want to discuss the idea of like, is there a big benefit in doing these one-off challenges that can like help people grow? For example, like tomorrow, I'm planning to cycle to the Peak District and then camp there overnight. And like, it's not like something that's going to be the fucking most challenging thing ever. It's not going to be like SAS or whatever, but like, I've never done anything like it, and it's going to be challenging for me. And I'm happy to be doing it, but I'm also scared. But I was wondering if the one-off challenge is worth doing, or is it more important maybe to focus on building habits?
Yeah, I think both are important, and I wouldn't say, obviously. So the argument in favor of habits would be that if you do this one-off event, then the benefits you get from it will fade over time, and ultimately the way you are is going to be determined by your daily routines and the things you do on a regular basis. So one might argue it all comes down to habits, but I do actually think there is a different sort of value in doing one-off extreme uncomfortable things, going outside your comfort zone, because perhaps realistically on a daily basis, for example, you can't go and you're going out and camping, and you're not, that's not something you can really do every night.
Mm.
Well, you could, but perhaps there's more better ROI things to be doing
Yeah.
anyway. But I do think these one-off challenges do allow you to push yourself in kind of a different way to your useful to to which you're used to. Sorry, but but yeah, and I think it teaches you. It can actually have a lesson which sticks with it, which is that you kind of realize that you can go through more uncomfortable things, and in the future, when you're in a bit of a daunting situation, you can think back and say, oh yeah, I've been in a situation where I've been extremely uncomfortable before, And yeah, I've got through it, and I think that's definitely a benefit of one-off events.
Yeah, yeah. I guess would you say like when a person creates these habits that are challenging, like going to the gym or going to jiu-jitsu training or what, like anything along those lines, those habits are like they're foreseeable, and like the events that happen within going to those and like performing those tasks are predictable almost to a sense. Not to take away the value that they bring, like you can still challenge yourself and create these growth like mentally and physically, but they are predictable and like almost known, whereas these one-off big events are completely unknown. But then what about if, like, for example, like I don't think this would happen, but if I ended up just going camping every single Saturday, or I did it once a month, like it's not necessarily something that's done on a regular basis, but it's regular enough where does it almost become predictable? Like, do you think humans should always be doing something that's completely unknown to them, like once a year maybe? Like, would that be something that's worth it?
Potentially it could benefit people, but I could also see an argument that it's not really necessary, and that just focusing on progressively making your daily habits more difficult. So at the gym, progressively getting stronger and making your workouts more intense, um, and things like that. Just pushing your daily habits slightly outside your comfort zone. To be honest, I would say that the daily habits and consistency is probably more important to personal development as opposed to these big one-off things.
Yeah.
But not to say these one-off things. As I said, I do think they still have value, and I guess the novelty and different and it being so different from your normal life is a big part of that. But it's hard to say. It depends on the thing. So to your question, like if you start doing it every month, would it become routine? Maybe to some extent. I'd still think going out and camping is probably like a good healthy thing to do, healthy activity, mix up the scenery a bit. But so I definitely don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's good to push ourselves, like occasionally far outside our comfort zone, because perhaps that makes us realize, oh yeah, I've been going through this monotonous routine, and I thought my habit, you might have quite good habits, but at the same time you realize, oh yeah, there's a lot more to give, which if you're just in a daily routine of things, you might not end up ever pushing yourself. Whereas when you do these big one-off challenges, let's say you do like a marathon or something, you could realize like, oh yeah, I actually have way more that I'm capable of, which I'm not currently using, and that could actually motivate you to do more in your daily routines and start pushing yourself harder in day-to-day life.
Yeah, they almost act as like these big off challenges almost act like in the sense like as an exam. Like the habits are your revision leading you up to it, and then the exam is the true test of what your potential is and what your level is at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think it's another thing I thought about, like if people are doing these kind of challenges and stuff, do you think it's worthwhile or maybe a bit too risky to kind of take away any sort of safety net that a person might have? Like me personally, I love the idea of like being a caveman again and just fucking hunter and gathering. That's just obviously in my head. I don't know if I'd actually like it realistic, like real terms. But when I think about like the trip I'm going to take, like should I be risky and like not take a phone and just go completely off grid, or is that like a silly idea? Like, do people need a safety net, or does that limit their growth?
Yeah, I think if you're doing something difficult, regardless of whether you have a safety net, then you're going to experience growth either way. It's not as if you're not going to experience growth if you do have some sort of safety net. But there is an argument that like burning what they call it, burning the boats and storming the castle, that type of thing. Like there's no you fully commit to it and there's no going back. Like if we're talking about doing something difficult, where you really want to push yourself beyond your limits, then if there's a way out, then it's quite likely that you'll take it. Whereas if you don't give yourself that safety net, then you're kind of forced to do something. And it depends on the situation, because obviously that could be dangerous. If I can't think of exact scenarios, but yeah, it depends on the situation really. But I do think there is something to be said of you can make a situation more uncomfortable by getting rid of the safety nets. What do you think? Is there a specific example you were thinking about with that? Was that like leaving your phone when you go camping?
Yeah, that's just an example that popped up to my mind just then. But I don't know, like, for example, like maybe if there's like a short swim that's still quite long, like, should you do that? Like, for example, if it was like between two countries and you had to swim through the sea and it was safe enough and people had done it before, but a person was maybe thinking of doing it, but they could do it with a safety boat just in case they struggled, or should they just do it by themselves and then the only thing they can rely on is their own body? It's an extreme example, and like, I don't think many people would ever get in a situation like that. But
yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I guess if the safety boat is there for if, I don't know, a shark comes, then that's probably a good
fight
idea.
the shark with your hand.
Yeah, I think that's a bit too far in terms of discomfort. Probably not going to have any long term benefits, I should say. But
no,
getting bit by a shark, it'll make you mentally tougher. To be fair, it'll make you realise that you don't need an arm. But I don't think that's. But if the boat's there to pick you up, if you can't be asked to finish what you're doing, then it's probably not a good thing. But well, who knows?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit out of reach, these ideas I'm talking about, because there's no point in putting a human life at risk, I guess. But like, for example, that guy, is it Alex Honnold, who free soloed some mountain or cliff face in America. I don't know if it was in Yosemite National Park or somewhere, but he free soloed that with no safety net. Like, if he falls, he's dead. Although they're saying that he did take like a year, literally just doing the same route over and over again with safety nets and, like, not nets but safety ropes. So I guess there was that training in order to make sure he can do it, and then he did it.
Yeah, I guess it's an individual decision whether they want to take that kind of risk. I'm sure for him it was worth it if that's what he's gone and done. But you're taking a risk, so it might pay off, it might not. One thing I thought about when you bringing up this idea of like burning the ships behind you, there's no going back, was recently. I think there's been a couple of situations in the UFC where champions have gone up to the next weight class, but they keep the belt for the weight class underneath. And I heard someone make a point that, like, if they had not, that they might. So the examples are Volkanovski versus Islam. He went up a weight class and didn't win the belt, but obviously kept his belt at featherweight. And then another example from a bit longer ago was Adesanya versus Jan. I'm not going to try and say his second name.
Blachowicz.
Yeah, yeah. I don't want to butcher it, but basically, yeah, Adesanya went up and he lost, but he kept his middleweight belt. And someone made a point that, if they had vacated their belt before going up and there was no going back, then they might have been able to win the fight. I'm not sure how much I agree with it. It's an interesting point, but I feel like they'd probably fight as hard as they could anyway. But potentially they could have had something more to give, and if they did, sacrifice a belt. And I think there is probably situations where giving yourself a safety net does probably hinder your performance.
Yeah, I hear that. That's an interesting idea. I never heard about that in terms of the UFC and stuff. But then there's also there's that desire to be the 2-weight champion, isn't there? Yeah. So few people have done it. and hold them both at the same time is such an accomplishment. Why would you want to like limit yourself to just being a? Although I guess could you just say like give up one belt and then go dominate the next weight class up or down, and then you still I guess are you technically still a double 2-weight champion?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only person who's been a 2-weight champion without holding the belts at the same time is GSP. I want to say when he came back and beat Bisping, he came out of retirement.
Right.
Whereas everyone else, they've kept the belt when they went for the other belt. So yeah, I don't think it really would make a difference to their legacy if they're a 2-weight champion, whether they decide to vacate the belt or not. I don't think it makes any difference to the legacy or the thing they've achieved.
Yeah.
But yeah, perhaps there's an argument that if you were to vacate the belt and you fully committed to the path and you were willing to lose everything to be even greater than you currently are, then there's an argument that could have pushed you the extra mile, and maybe not in the UFC because maybe it does just come down to skill versus skill. You know, it wouldn't necessarily mean they acquired any new technical skills that would have won them the fight. But I do think it's an interesting philosophy which could maybe be applied to other parts of life, not giving yourself an easy way out, taking the hard route and being willing to sacrifice what you currently have to gain even more in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of parallels in life with that. Like, a lot of people will stay in relationships which are bad for them because there's a certain comfort in it and they don't want to lose what they currently have. But unless they step out of that relationship, then they'll never be able to attain a better one.
Yeah. That must happen all the fucking time.
Yeah,
I mean, would you say that's the reason people... No, that's not the reason people get divorced, but if people didn't think that... Oh, how do I say this? If people believed that they could leave and find something better, do you think that divorces would never happen? Because by the time people get married, they know that they found the right one that they could cohabit with for the rest of their lives. Or do you think people kind of settle down a bit too early and then, like, after X number of years or months, they realise, oh, fuck this, I don't want to be with this person?
Yeah, I mean, this leads into a whole other can of worms about, you know, what makes a successful marriage, and perhaps that is a factor which contributes to it. Although, you know, no, I'm not too sure, but perhaps it does contribute. But I wouldn't want to, you know, if you look at that on a broad scale, if everyone had the attitude, oh, I'm going to refuse to settle unless everything's perfect, then that would probably lead to more people breaking up and divorcing each other. Whereas there is something to be said about, you know, things potentially being imperfect, but still committing to making them better and making someone your life partner. So there is a bit of a trade-off there, but for some people, that it definitely is a factor that you know, they're going to have to make a sacrifice to get out of this relationship, which isn't the best for them. And it's going to be painful for them and in the short term, but ultimately it's the right decision. But, you know, not taken away from how hard that decision can be to make, but you know, it is a fact that a lot of people aren't able to make that decision, and probably, you know, definitely has a negative effect on their well-being.
Yeah, 100% agree. Talking of, like, judging, like, if a person's kind of right for you or not right for you, another thing I want to discuss is, like, it's inevitable that people judge other people, and I think that's kind of something that's just ingrained in humans, and I don't necessarily think it's something that should be, like, thought of as negative. Like, you need to have value-based judgments to understand where to, like, direct your attention and stuff. But when I was thinking about it, I was thinking, like, if I'm judging someone and if someone else is judging another person, like, are we judging that person based off our own action in our own lives, or do we judge them based off how we think someone should live a life? Like, are we judging the person purely off the way that me and the way that I, as an individual, live my life, or am I kind of judging them based off like a higher set of principles? Do you think?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, and obviously it's going to vary between people. Maybe it'd be good to try and define what the optimal state is. What do you think we should judge people on? Should we judge them compared to ourselves on our own inadequacies, or should we be able to, or should we compare them to a higher standard?
I think if you compare them to a higher standard, it'll be something that's good as long as you make sure that you compare yourself to that same standard. But if I'm interacting with a group of people, and say one of the people in that group kind of basically just like is really rude to another member, or like embarrasses this member, or does something like along those lines, I could judge that person and think I wouldn't do that, or I could judge that person and say, based on higher principles, a person shouldn't do that. Instead, they could do this. And I think if you judge someone based off higher principles, there's a higher chance that you can judge yourself off those principles, because everyone has a bias towards themselves, and like most people probably think that they live their life the right way. I don't know how true that is, but like most people have like a bias towards themselves. So trying to attain a higher principle would kind of get rid of that bias a little bit, I think.
Yeah. So I think a Stoic philosophy on this topic is, the way Stoics view it is you should hold yourself to a much higher standard than you hold anyone else to. If anything, you should almost be completely detached to holding anyone else from a certain standard, because it's not within your control, and it's not because it's not in your control. It's
a responsibility.
It's kind of, you could maybe even go as far to say it's irresponsible for you to spend time thinking about how this other person should act, because you're not focusing on what you should be doing in yourself. And I do resonate with that philosophy quite a lot. And there's a quote from the Bible I know that you like about, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, something to that effect. And that kind of echoes the Stoic philosophy that you shouldn't, we're obviously flawed, and you shouldn't criticize others, because we should maybe be more focused on our own, holding ourselves to a higher moral standard. And I think perhaps that's a recipe for a better well-being overall, because if you care so much about how other people are acting, then you're kind of outsourcing how you feel and your own happiness to other people. When if you're focused on yourself, then you do have agency and control over that. But there is an argument to be had about, if you're a good friend, for example, and you see your friend doing some sort of activity which is self-sabotage, as a good friend, you will hold them to a certain standard, and you'll tell them, I think I think you're doing something which is bad for you, and you could, and if you were to stop doing this, you'd be able to fulfill your potential more. Like that's basically what you'd be saying to them, and you could argue that that's the right thing to do. But in that situation, you're holding someone else to a higher standard. So there's different outlooks on it. But I think I do agree with what you were saying, that I think you definitely should never hold someone to a higher standard than you hold yourself. I think that's a recipe for just resentment, and I definitely don't think that's good. But
how do you think that kind of causes resentment?
Well, if you hold someone to a higher standard than you hold yourself, when someone else does something, or when something bad happens, and perhaps there's a situation where there are multiple people to blame, one of which is yourself, you could look at the situation and think, I could have done something differently, or there was errors in the way I acted. which made me handle the situation poorly. But at the same time, if there's other people that contributed to a bad situation, then if you're someone that holds other people to a higher standard, then you do that thing where you outsource the blame to those people, and that will make you resentful about the situation. Whereas I think when you take complete personal responsibility and don't try and hold other people to a standard and, try and blame them, whether that be out loud or in your own head, I think that does that leads to resentment. Whereas, an example is David Goggins. I think I might have mentioned this last time, but he was talking about how in one of his ultramarathon races, he had a pacer who was supposed to show him directions, and he took him the wrong way for I don't know what it was, 10, 15 miles, and they didn't realise, and then he had to turn back and then run back that distance and then get back on course. And in that situation, it probably was that other person's fault. And if he held them to the same standard or a higher standard than he held himself, then he would end up blaming that person and being resentful about the situation. But because his attitude towards things is to take complete personal responsibility and focus on what's in his control, he knew that putting that kind of holding that person to that standard in that situation would actually lead to him being angry and having a go at this person. It decreases the morale of the entire team, and it's just overall not a good outcome. Whereas when he took complete personal responsibility and thought, yeah, I should have been checking the directions as well. I shouldn't be completely reliant on someone else for that.
Yeah,
that's my own fault. And then just focusing on the action he needs to do to correct what's gone wrong, that's a much healthier way of being. Whereas if he held himself to a low standard and this other person to a high standard, he would have had a go at them, taken no personal responsibility, and probably blames them when if he wasn't able to finish the race, which is a complete opposite to his attitude. And I think his attitude is right, of looking at situations and focusing on your own mistakes and taking complete accountability, because that allows you to make improvements.
No, that makes a lot of sense, actually. I think that kind of expands on what we were talking about earlier. I think, like you're saying, if you don't hold them to that high standard, like you hold yourself to, does that kind of open you up to see the positive or good things in them? Not to necessarily see the positive or good things in them, but forget about the negatives almost. You kind of, there's a bit of a yin and yang with what we talked about earlier, how a solution for anger or these other negative feelings is looking for the good in things and people, whereas the way that Goggins approached it is just forgetting about the negative and taking responsibility for their own actions.
Yeah, it's
more proactive.
Yeah, this reminds me of a clip from Modern Wisdom podcast episode with Jordan Peterson, where he was asking about, he was saying that, so Chris, the host of the podcast, was saying, yeah, it's useful to have an enemy to help drive you to improve, and perhaps you make a sacrifice to some degree for inner peace by giving up that enemy, because you've lost the drive there. So the sacrifice is you're losing some drive by having an enemy, but the thing you gain is some sense of inner peace and not this sense of resentment to the world. But then Jordan Peterson said, well, you should think about where is the enemy, and ultimately the place you should seek for the enemy is within yourself. Like how do you yourself self-sabotage? How do you not live up to your potential? What negative things are you doing which you could be doing differently, but you're not, out of your own inadequacy? And that's so in a situation where you're dealing with anger, perhaps you should point that anger towards yourself. And if for some reason you're not happy with your situation or your life, I think when you become angry at other people, but a lot of the time, I think this is speaking for me personally, I think a lot of the time that's just a projection of frustrations with myself, and
Mm.
ultimately I should, in that situation, take accountability for my actions, and if anything, direct the anger towards myself and place the enemy with myself, rather than other people. So I suppose that does take away the negativity and resentment you'd feel for other people, and perhaps allow you to see more good in other people. And if you, you know, focus your efforts to fight against evil, so to speak, on yourself, then yeah, perhaps you can see more good in other people.
Yeah, I like that actually. I just started watching another anime on fucking Netflix, and it's like about Vikings and stuff. And there's one scene in it where there's this like just fucking absolute monster of a guy. He's like a really peaceful warrior, but he's just like an absolute boss. And then his son's like this little kid, and like he wants to be like his dad and like kill all the enemies or whatever. And he just goes to his son and he just says to him, like, "You have no enemies." I can't remember exactly how he says it or whatever, but it's quite a powerful moment in the in the series, because like his son is very vengeful and wants to get revenge for something that happened to him, and he wants to have like a sword and like go after and kill all these people. But his dad's like, "Who are your enemies? You have no enemies." And I guess that is like Jordan Peterson dives into that and explains it perfectly.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good example.
Yeah, it seems like media, I've realised recently, like is very influential on people. Like I used to kind of think before, like, is it really that important that like every single type of thing in the world is represented in all movies from now on and stuff? And I sort of think it is important. I think there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it, obviously, but like the stories that are told through movies are so influential on like a young person's brain, and even like an older person, I think, just a little bit less so, because when you get older, you get a bit more stubborn and stuck in your own ways. But there's such powerful messaging in like so many movies, like Lion King, Marvel, that series I was just on about, and like all these other things. They're so subliminal, but like powerful, and it kind of blows my mind sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. I think narrative can certainly have a powerful effect on people, but yeah, it's important that the narrative is I don't think you can just have it anyway and it will be able to influence people. Because, for example, the reason you resonated with this part of the series where this person realizes that that the enemy is within themselves, and perhaps the realization is that in order to conquer your real life enemies, the people you're supposed to defeat, you need to first conquer yourself. And I think that's a powerful message, and that's something that would resonate with people because it's true. So I don't think you can just make up a narrative, but that leads us into a whole conversation about archetypes, about how there's certain things which resonate with us as humans as we see the world in kind of a narrative way, which is why stories and movies can have such an effect on us. And that can be a positive effect if it helps us have realizations which help us to improve the way we view the world and the way we act.
Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah, I guess you just got to make sure you watch the right shit. That's difficult to know. Yeah. Talking about enemies and like actions and stuff. There's a great quote I heard from James Clear, that the author of Atomic Habits. He was on Tim Ferriss's podcast. It must have been ages ago, but I just kind of found the episode again. I was watching it or listening to it, sorry, and just a great one-liner. He says, "Every action you take is a vote for the kind of person you want to become." And it really stuck with me, to be fair. Not necessarily that it's made me change the stupid actions that I take on a daily basis and get rid of them, but it's a nice way to think about it. Like I think me and my sister were talking about this like last week, how the person I am is so different, or the person anybody is so different to the person they were like 2 years ago. But if you kind of minimize that time frame, you'd say that the person's almost the same. For example, like me in a month's time is pretty much the same as who I am now. But if that month gets extended to 6 months, I'm a little bit different. And then if it gets extended to a year, to 2 years, to 3, to 5, I'm a very different person. And obviously, from 5 years to now, I could be completely different, but it's an incremental change to get to that point. And I think that James Clear's quote kind of sums it up perfectly.
Yeah, I think that's a great quote, and it speaks to the importance of delaying gratification and making decisions based on the person you want to become, not what you want to feel in the moment. And if we're not aware, then we can end up making decisions simply for pleasure in the moment. But and it's difficult looking on a small time frame to think, how is this going to affect me in 5 years if I make this decision today? But it tilts the balance in a certain direction. So your good decisions today, they might not show for many years. But and also, you know, in terms of that quote about each action being a vote for the person you want to be in the future, it's maybe even more important than a vote, because, you know, a vote indicates it's kind of an isolated thing, whereas in truth, the decisions you make today will affect the decisions you make tomorrow. So if you make a good decision today, you're more likely to make that good decision tomorrow. And then that would mean you're more likely to make it the next day. So it's kind of this positive feedback loop, which can lead to exponential progress in the right or wrong direction. So rather than just accumulating linearly over time as a vote each day would, it accumulates in an exponential fashion. But yeah, I do think the quote gets to the heart of, you know, incremental progress being very important. And yeah, we need to think about decisions on a long-term basis. And we spoke about this in an episode a little while ago about delayed versus instant gratification. And one thing I came up with as a tool for people to think about the decisions they make is think, okay, it's difficult to see the effects of an action you do today, about how that will affect you in several years' time. But you could just take a moment to imagine, what if I were to make this decision every single day for the next year? What would my life look like? And if it looks better, then it's a good decision. And if it looks worse, then it's a bad decision. And that can probably help motivate us to make better decisions if we consider the long-term impacts, as opposed to just considering it on a day-to-day or week-to-week time scale where you don't really see the effects of your actions.
Yeah, I like that. That little tool that you use, and I think like with that tool, for example, like that's not to say that, like, for example, wasting a bit of time each day is a bad thing. Like if I was to say going on YouTube for 15-20 minutes a day, let's just say that's the amount of time I spend on it every day. If I was to do that every day for a year, although that's time wasted, it wouldn't necessarily make my life worse, as long as I'm doing other things that can keep me on the right path and like keep me making progress. So although it's a very general tool, like you can get quite specific with it, and I like that.
Yeah, and you can adjust the time frame to depending on the situation. So the advantage of a longer time frame is that you'd be able to see bigger effects of your actions, which might be motivating to you. But at the same time, if it's really far down the road, then it's kind of a bit more disconnected from what you're currently doing. Whereas if you consider a short time frame, it might be a bit easier for you to visualize, oh, this is how it would affect me. Whereas if you consider how it would affect you over a really long time frame, then you might not have the foresight to really know that. Whereas over a shorter time frame, you might be able to predict it more accurately and more concretely, which might resonate with you more. So yeah, it's a good thing to think about. And obviously, you said quite rightly that, you know, doing something small each day, as long as you're doing more right things, then you should be all right. But yeah, maybe it's something to consider over a daily period. Like if I repeated this day or this week for a year, what would my life be, better or worse? And yeah, perhaps that's a more realistic way than just looking at individual tasks. Although, you know, perhaps there is some great value in overinflating the importance of your individual decisions, because maybe if you focused so much on making the right decisions, making good decisions in each and every moment, then that's what will put you on the right trajectory. But it is difficult, and that's something I've struggled with myself, is finding that balance, being able to implement a little bit of time wasting for the sake of making your day like a bit more enjoyable and sustainable,
Yeah,
versus just removing everything and removing the distractions, so not to fall into them too much. But yeah,
yeah,
that's something I'm personally navigating.
yeah. Going back to that quote that James Clear said, is a good point that you made. That it's maybe not necessarily a vote, but it should be thought about more in terms of like the accumulation of like progress. Because a vote kind of seems isolated from the overall picture of oneself. There's a great video of Jocko Willink, and it's like a motivational video, and he talks about, like, summarizing what he says. He's obviously says it in a very powerful way. They've like edited it, so there's kind of like music over it and shit. But he talks about how Rome wasn't built in a day. That it took years for Rome to become the superpower that it was, and following on from that, Rome also didn't decay and deteriorate in a day. It also took years to fall and become this like ancient civilization that was once like the biggest superpower in the world. And what he's kind of getting to is, although people can kind of think that if they're taking positive actions, that's a good thing and they're making progress, they also need to realize that when you're not making progress, you're almost making the opposite of progress. Not in every situation, but I think I've definitely forgot about that. Like, if I don't do anything for a few days, I'd kind of assume, I'm kind of just maintaining what I'm doing, maintaining myself. But if you're not making these small amounts of progress, you're almost always falling backwards. And I think that's something that people can kind of forget.
Yeah, you never really maintain in life. You're either getting better or getting worse. So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I love that video. To be fair, I've not watched it in fucking ages, but it's a great video. And it's dark.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one. Yeah, but what was that, Jocko's podcast?
Yeah. If you just put in something on YouTube like Jocko Willink inspirational video, it should come up as like one of the top ones.
Yeah.
It might be part of a montage of like different clips he has, or it might be a singular video by itself. But that's just great.
I'll have a look.
Yeah, I should probably have a look as well. I'll probably need it for tomorrow. Fucking hell. What was I going to say? Yeah, anything else that you want to kind of just discuss?
I think that's good for an episode if we've hit all those talking points.
Yeah, nice discussion. Hope everyone enjoyed listening and watching. If you are watching, please check us out on YouTube and Spotify if you've not. Like and subscribe, all that shit. That's episode 30 done. Thank you very much, guys. We'll see you later, I guess.
See ya.